Now 250,000. Now, but to get 275. High, but to get 275. 3. Now 300,000. Now 3 1/4. 325. High, but to get 3 1/4. But to get 325. Now half. Now but to get 300. And hello. Here's another edition of the Mike McGavel Jones Show here in North Dallas. We are conveniently located in the center of the universe at LBJ and the North Dallas Tollway. We have a special guest today, and we're going to talk to them in just a few minutes. I do want to just mention the fact that we just had this horrendous weather event in the last 10 to 14 days, whatever it's been now. And so we had, I think they said, as many as 10 tornadoes in North Texas, and a lot of it is just south of here, just within 4 blocks, 5 blocks of here. We were very affected by this. A lot of the roads have been shut down, and miraculously, we lost no one, which is, just an absolute amazing thing. I don't think the United States or the folks around the country have any idea how bad this event was, and how many of our friends and family members have been affected by it. But if you are a part of the North Texas community, or you're in Texas, you probably do know the coverage was larger here. But when you look at the news, they covered it for like a day. And but these people will be displaced for quite some time. Some of the homes were totally destroyed. We had some of the public schools were destroyed. That are going to have major repairs. Of course, we noticed over the weekend that Jerry Jones announced that he's going to give $1 million to fix their football field up. Mark Cuban's going to match the money, and then the community as a whole is putting a lot of money in to do the infrastructure to get things fixed up. But we want to send out our thoughts and prayers to all of our North Texas friends who were affected by the bad weather, and let them know that we will be, I'm sure, involved in some fundraising events to help them regroup and recoup. And but it was an amazing weather event. Having said that, Travis, today's show is dedicated to the March of Dimes. And the March of Dimes is a group that I've been involved with for many, many years through their signature chef events. I, at one time in the last 15 years, actually conducted almost all of the signature chef events in a year. So I would do Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, Austin, and Fort Worth. And then over time, things change, directions change, management of the organization has changed. But I've had a great opportunity to serve as the chief auctioneer for March of Dimes. And we have a major event coming up we're going to talk about. But right now, I really want to introduce my guest, and then we're going to talk about the March of Dimes and kind of remind people exactly what March of Dimes is, because there are so many different fundraising groups out there today, major 501c3s, et cetera. And some get a lot more advertising than others. So it's good to remind people of who we're working for and where their history comes from, because a lot of people just don't know the history. This morning, I'd like to introduce Natalie Sawyer. And Natalie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. And then we have Lori and Jamie Aaron. And good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. So we're going to talk. First, I'd like to get everybody to know you and kind of where you're from and a little bit of life history. And I'm going to start with you, Natalie. I understand you're from another state, so I'm going to ask you to tell me about where you're from and kind of how you grew up.
I was raised in a small farming community in Iowa, northwest Iowa specifically. My dad was a preacher of a very small congregation, so I grew up as a pretty typical preacher's kid. And we lived there most of my life as a student and high schooler, and then I made my way to Texas for college, and I married a native Texan, and that's kind of how we have ended up here permanently now.
Where did you go to school?
Abilene Christian.
Yeah, Abilene Christian. Know it very well. So you married a Texan, so you made a right move there. Now you said that you were a typical preacher's child, basically. That could go either way.
Really, I think I lived on both sides of that.
Well, we'll just leave it at that.
Probably.
But we're glad to have you here. And I know you've been affected by the things that March of Dimes, what we do and what our goals are, and we're going to let you kind of tell your story in just a little bit, and then we've got the errands, and I'm going to start with well, let's see, Lori, I know you want to talk.
Okay.
Let's start with you.
Native of Dallas.
Yeah.
I went to Richardson High School and University of Texas in Austin.
Nice.
And I'm a homemaker now to 3 wonderful boys. And I volunteer at Medical City in the NICU.
Very good. Very good. Well, now see, that was easy, wasn't
Yes.
it? Yeah, there you go.
It's actually stunning. She usually says 4 boys, so
Yes,
I feel
have,
let off the
I like
hook.
to say I have 4 boys. He's my oldest. My husband, my oldest.
Well, that's kind of common around the country, isn't it? Jamie, tell me about you.
Let's see. I was born in Houston, raised there, went to UT Austin as well, moved to Dallas for work. I was a journalist, sports writer for the Associated Press for 20 years, and then left there, and now I work for the American Heart Association.
Wow. So now did you both meet in Austin?
After, it was in Dallas. I actually went to college with her sister.
Yeah, there's always a connection.
Yes.
Yeah, very good. Well, thank you for being here today, guys. I know you're passionate about March of Dimes. It's
Yes.
obviously affected you in a very big way. So we're going to talk about that. I want to go to Natalie first. And why don't you tell me your story. Tell me the history of what happened with you.
Well, we had 2 little boys at the time. Lucas was 3 and Ethan was a year old. And we were very unexpectedly found to be expecting, and then even more so with twins. And, everybody asked, does twins run of your family? No, we can't find any twins anywhere on either side of our families. So all of that was very surprising. I had a fairly normal pregnancy up until about 15 weeks, and then just everything kind of started to go wrong. But no one was really sure what was going on. And at 25 weeks, I went into labor. They were able to stop the labor. I was on hospital bed rest for about 2 weeks. And then one of the babies just couldn't wait any longer. So we delivered at 27 weeks and started our life in the NICU. We heard the babies cry. They sounded like tiny, tiny cats is the only way I could really describe that sound. And it was about 4 hours later before we were able to see them. Isaac was the stronger of the 2, and he was what they called a feeder and a grower. He just needed to get big and get out. He was also lazy. So he was in there way longer than he really needed to be because he just didn't want to have to learn how to drink a bottle. And then our Sammy, he had a lot of different things go wrong. One of the most special things that my husband was able to do for Sam was he is O positive, I believe, and he was able to give directed blood donations to Sammy on 3 different occasions. So that was really special for our family. And after about 100 days, we got to go home, and Isaac has continued to thrive and do amazingly well. Sammy is our kid that crashes. So what may start out as a cold could end him up in the hospital. He's been in sepsis several different times. But they started kindergarten this year, and one of them is already reading. Samuel continues to receive therapy. He has cerebral palsy. It's very, very mild. We're so lucky in that regard. And then he has something called Dyspraxia, which is a spectrum disorder that affects motor coordination and motor planning. And for most people, if they don't know Sam really well, they'll be like, he seems like a pretty clumsy kid. So he is not going to be a star athlete, but he is amazing. And it's been a wild ride for all of us. My older boys were impacted differently by the NICU than Will and I, but we all kind of have some residual scars from those 100 days. It's just a very different experience.
Sure. Well, people hear about these stories, but unless you live it, you don't get it. You're not going to get it. Which hospital were you at?
I was at a hospital in San Antonio.
In San Antonio?
Yes, sir.
I see. So the kids they're in kindergarten.
Yeah, the twins are 6. They're in kindergarten. Yes.
Is there anything special that you have to do for them, or are they just like any other kid in the class?
Right now, they're like any other kid in the class. Sam does get pulled out for occupational and physical therapy, just because that motor planning side of things really affects his ability to write. And he will need the ongoing therapy just to keep his joints and muscles from becoming spastic due to the cerebral palsy.
Sure.
But Isaac is just
Thriving?
thriving. Yeah.
Well, you're blessed.
So blessed.
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
Let's talk a little bit, before I talk to the Aarons, I'd like to talk a little bit about the March of Dimes, the history thereof. So, as you pointed out to me, March of Dimes is 83 years old.
Yes, sir.
And it really became prominent because of President Roosevelt
Yes, sir.
and his struggle with polio. And, of course, back in the day, they tried to keep it a secret as much as possible. The goal was, to make it not appear that he had it, because they didn't want to show any sign of weakness. He didn't want to show any sign of weakness, and they were fighting these wars, and we had all these things going on in the country. The country was a mess. We're actually lucky to have a country right now. And if it hadn't been for Roosevelt and Churchill and others, we might not be having this conversation right now. But I know that Jamie, you have a story. And I love the story, and I'd never heard this story before. And but what began with President Roosevelt was the creation of the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, which is known as March of Dimes. So you tell me your story here. I love this story.
So the legend, as I heard it, was that when they made the nationwide address, I guess it was the president's weekly radio show or whatever they had back then, and he was talking to an entertainer. Kind of the biggest, I guess, like the Beyonce of his day, Eddie Cantor. I don't know if the president was on Eddie's show or Eddie was with the president, but they talked about how we were going to try to wipe out polio, and we wanted everybody in the country to mail in a dime, and we would collect these dimes, and it would go to fund the research that would cure polio. And Eddie Cantor says, well, what are we going to call this March of Dimes? And from there, the names took, and it became quite the phenomenon. I mean, there's pictures at the March of Dimes offices, even I think videos online where they show you of the male people carrying sacks of dimes in these humongous collections, and it took off. I mean, I guess it just resonated. It was the right message at the right time. It struck a chord, and it really made a difference right away.
I think that's an amazing story.
Oh, it's phenomenal history, and well, the most amazing part of all is that it worked.
Yeah.
Obviously, years later, Dr. Salk invented the polio vaccine, and I mean, how many organizations have met their marching orders? The organization was created to cure polio. Bam, they cured polio.
We should have put him. We should have put him on some other diseases too at the same time.
That's right.
That's
right.
They made it look easy.
They did. I remember as a child in the 60s being vaccinated for polio. They were still vaccinating even at that point. And, of course, vaccinations were scary. If you're a 5 or 6 year old kid or 4, I can't even remember I think I was probably 3 or 4. And I can remember in Gainesville, Texas, right up the highway, there used to be a large wooden structure. It was the Civic Center is what they called it, but it was really just an old building from an Army base that they had moved into town and made that a kind of a place to come to. And I still recall the kids lined up down the street. All the kids in the whole town were lined up getting their vaccinations. And you had all these nurses, and you can kind of picture what nurses looked like back there, back at that time in the early 60s with those interesting hats. And I don't really know what to call those hats, but I just remember that was one of those pivotal moments in my memory as a child of getting the polio vaccine. And my stepfather had actually had a bout of polio, so but he was cured and was able to function perfectly fine. But people don't even talk about polio anymore because it's non-existent. We don't have to deal with that anymore. Let's talk about your situation and kind of what happened in your lives, and you can take the lead, or she can, either one of you. Lori, if you want to, you can talk about
I'll start and you can jump in. How's that?
it. That'll work.
Okay, so
I think we're creating history here. Yeah.
our oldest, at 23 weeks, when I was pregnant with him, at 23 weeks, I was put on bed rest.
Okay, let's back up.
Okay.
So you guys get married, and you decide to have children, or it just happened? Did you
No, we
plan?
decided, yeah.
Okay. So about what time? What year would this be? What year would this have been?
1997.
97, yeah.
So a little
We got
over,
married in 96, started trying to have kids in 97.
little over 20 years ago.
Yes,
So
yes.
I'm kind of give the perspective of timing here. So
Okay.
her kids are in kindergarten, and your kids are not. So
This one's in college right
Yeah,
now.
so-
He's a junior in college.
so let's go back 20 years.
Okay, so I was 23 weeks pregnant with him, and I was put on bed rest at home, 3-minute showers, only get up to use the restroom, get water, the whole deal. And I was on medication, and 1 month before he was born, I was taken off the medication. It was safe.
1 month before their due date.
Before the due date, I'm sorry. They told me I can stop the medication, and the next day he was born. So he was 1 month early, which we didn't really think of anything about that.
Well, they were prepared for the early labor, so they had given her these steroid shots to speed up the development of
Lungs.
his lungs. In case he arrived early, he would be better equipped to survive in the real world.
And then 3 years later, I was pregnant with twins.
Oh, my.
Yes. They,
And the hits just keep on coming.
twins, yes, with Natalie.
Wow.
So at 17 weeks, I was getting contractions, so I was put on bed rest.
Wow.
And at,
No, twins generally come early, so they were already on high alert for that. And knowing that she'd had the issues with premature labor the first time around, that she was on even so everybody was on high alert for all these various reasons already. And so then at the first sign of symptoms, bed rest was an
bed rest
obvious
was-
choice.
Yes. And at 23 weeks, my water broke with one of the boys. Jamie was at a Mavericks game, a playoff, working. It was a terrible storm. I had to, he couldn't hear, I would call him and he couldn't hear his phone ringing because the Maverick game, playoff, is so loud. And
It was a playoff game.
Yes.
Even better.
Yes. So I had to contact his office, who messaged him on the computer that he needed to call home. I called my sister, and she ran me to the medical city here in Dallas. And they hooked me up to all the medications. I was laying with my feet a little bit higher, inclined backwards, higher than my head. And
Yeah, so the two things, the way they slowed the labor was gravity and a medicine to slow her labor. So just to understand the details, when she says the water broke, so the water broke on baby A, and the baby B had a separate water bag. So they, in keeping, there was sort of this, they brought us to this understanding that one of your babies was already compromised, but the other one is not. We're going to do all that we can to protect the baby who's been compromised, but we kind of need to focus more on the baby who has the better long-term chance. So it wasn't an either-or sort of thing, but it was, they were in lockstep. But this was the best plan for both of them, was to delay delivery by the medicine and the gravity. She's motioning me to keep going.
She's rooting you on.
yes.
That's it. That's one way of putting it. So so that was a Thursday. We spent Friday talking to doctors.
Just so you know, what's great about this is since you've been a reporter,
Yeah.
you're a detailed kind of guy.
Yes, he is.
Extremely,
yes.
yeah. I'm thinking about all the different details, the little anecdotes
You
that
can
she
s-
skipped over along the way, but that's
Go
fine.
ahead.
No,
You
no,
go
no.
ahead.
that's-
You can't ask for a better set of
Yes,
guests because
exactly.
I've got all these people that have done all this stuff, and then I've got the reporter in the room.
Yes.
Yeah, and all
So
these
anyway.
years later, I've told the story many a times. That's why she likes to pitch it to me.
Well, I like it. Go ahead.
So that Friday, we met with a lot of doctors. That's how we got our big understanding. One detail that's worth illuminating on is she pointed out the storm that was happening that Thursday night. So she, before I went to the game, she had already been feeling a little weird, but we had an appointment the next morning, and she'd felt that same sensation before without any problems. So we said, well, okay, it's safe enough for me to go to the game. And but then the storm came, and so that was a degree of difficulty for both of us getting to the hospital. But once things were calmed down at the hospital, the OBGYN actually told us that when she left work that afternoon, she said to one of her nurses, I'm going to be coming back here tonight because of this storm that's coming. So it's apparently, kind of like a full moon brings out the crazies. Bad storms and extreme changes in barometric pressure apparently cause women to go into labor. So
I didn't know that.
no, it's one of those like weird, I don't know if it's a old wives' tale or something, but it came true for us. So that storm is it seems trivial, but it actually is a piece of the puzzle. So anyway, so that Friday, we're talking to doctors, and they convinced us this concept of delayed delivery, which was the baby who's compromised is going to have to come out sooner rather than later because the water broke. But then brother will have a different birthday.
Yep.
So we kind of went to sleep that night trying to find a little bit of humor in twins with different birthdays. The next morning, all night, Lori had trouble breathing. And what it turned out to be was the combination of gravity being tilted backwards and the side effect of the medicine. Her body was building up this sepsis, this poisonous fluid, and it was settling into her lungs, and she couldn't breathe. So the words from the doctor, the same doctor who had mentioned about the barometric pressure, she said, you're my patient first, not the baby's. And what was needed the only thing that would cure Lori was not taking that medicine and changing the gravity. So they had to deliver the babies at that point. And so this was 23 weeks into pregnancy, 23 weeks and a few days. And that is known, even still, as the brink of viability, meaning any earlier and they wouldn't even try to save their life.
Wow.
And at this point, it was still, extremely unlikely. Odds are heavily stacked against us. And so they bring out baby A in the delivery room, it was operating room, and they had just a humongous team of people, of doctors and nurses and different people ready to, somebody had to care for Lori, team for Lori, a team for baby A team for baby B, and, hey, Dad, get off to the side and get out of our way. So baby A comes out, and, the tiniest thing you've ever seen.
They made baby one leave.
No, baby, no. I was off to the side, soaking it all in. And so baby A is put in this incubator, and there was a nurse who had this long blonde ponytail, and she was at the head. There were two other nurses there working on the baby's body. And the nurse who was at the head had a bag where she was a breathing bag. So she was helping the baby breathe. And she was sitting there just shaking her head no. And she had this long ponytail that's swishing back and forth on her head. She's shaking her head so violently. And the doctor comes over to me, the neonatologist who delivered him, and she said, he's not breathing. Should we keep trying? And, we had discussed some things in the previous day during the 24, 36 hours that we'd been at the hospital, but never this. We accepted the reality that the babies might die, but we never talked about could we or should we intervene. And so the instinctive reaction was, hell yes, keep trying. And so they did, and then out comes baby B. And it wasn't the same dramatic scene with the swishing ponytail, but it was the same question. He wasn't breathing either. And so it's the same answer, obviously, hell yes. And to speed things along, they got them breathing, and they had to take them from there to the NICU. And we actually, the hospital, the way it was set up at the time, you had to go down a set of elevators to switch to another bank of elevators to get to the NICU. And along the way, we passed our parents. And my father looked at the babies, and their skin was like translucent. I mean,
Yep.
and so the description he had was that they were like baby birds, newly hatched baby birds.
Yep.
And
There's nothing there.
right,
They're
I
just-
mean, it's
They're skeletal.
something you have to see to understand.
Yep.
And so then they're brought to the NICU, and they start doing all the life-saving stuff and trying to, again, more teams of people and machines and hooking them up. Meanwhile, Lori's in the operating room, and they're trying to take care of her and get her into intensive care. And so, I mean, the story isn't about me; it's about her and the kids. But there was this conflict of wherever I was needed more in the other place, or at least there was the guilt of where to be.
It's your family story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's developing in 2 or 3 different places at once.
So was this at Medical City?
Yes.
Yes, just down the street from here.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's my hospital.
well, you're in.
Great one.
I'm on a different elevator all the time, and if you can just figure out how to get around Medical City, that's a miracle. I was there last week. I'm going like, I actually got on the telephone to get directions.
From
Funny.
within the building.
Yeah, I was getting ready to put Waze on. So keep going with
Yeah,
your story.
no problem. So, they sat us down me down and said, if your babies live, they're going to have problems with their eyes, their ears, their hearts, their lungs, their brains, and they mentioned a lot of other problems. And I always lumped them into this group of things you have telephones for. That this was just everything that could go wrong was supposed to go wrong, and the immediate concern was the lungs, and then brain bleeds. These things were such foreign concepts to us. One other thing about our first child was I mentioned the steroid shot. So because of that, he did not have to go to the NICU. They actually told us back then when he was born, they said, we want you to come see the NICU in case so you'll be braced for this if he has to go in there. And I said, if there's a chance he's not going to go in there, I don't want to see it. I'll see it if I need to see it. And so he was strong enough. He was only 4 pounds 10 ounces, but thanks to the steroid shot, his lungs had developed enough that he didn't have to go to the NICU. So it's the same thing. The day before, that same day that we were doing the decision about the delayed delivery, they said, you want to go see the NICU? And I said, well, this time there's a chance I might not see it for the wrong reasons. I said, I still don't want to see it.
Yeah.
And it was just being practical, not being emotional. But so here I am in there, and they were telling me all these bad things that could or should happen to our babies. So let me switch gears a bit on the story. So the next day, Lori was in intensive care, and Lori was in intensive care after the delivery of the first child because there were some complications in that surgery. And when she had been in the intensive ICU at a different hospital, I remember asking the nurses there, I said, well, because they all got giddy when they brought up the baby. I said, well, don't you have babies brought up here all the time? And they said, oh no, we only have 2 or 3 maternity patients a year. So that was kind of jarring. And so here we are again in the same situation, again, maternity patient in the ICU. And so now this day, though, this was a Sunday. This was Mother's Day.
Well,
And
wow.
the nurses and Lori still hadn't seen her
I still
children.
hadn't seen them because I was going in and out during the delivery.
Sure.
Right.
In fact, one of I'll get to that second. So the nurses in the NICU were this was 2002, so there was no digital cameras, or they weren't common yet. They existed, they just weren't common. And they took Polaroid pictures of baby A and baby B, and that's what I'm sorry, I keep hitting the mic. They were still called baby A and baby B because we hadn't even come around to names yet.
Yep.
And so they took the Polaroid pictures, and then they took their little feet and took feet prints and put them on just a little piece of paper and wrote Happy Mother's Day. And, wrote on the Polaroid the little strip on the bottom, baby A, baby B. I'm going to jump forward to the future once we started working with the March of Dimes.
Sure.
We realized
Whoops.
that those feet print were so small that they fit on a business card.
So that's
These are the actual feet prints from that day, from Mother's Day,
That's amazing.
their second day of life.
that's a pretty awesome card.
It is. You can keep that.
Thank you.
And so Lori at one point wakes up from her comatose state, and she's explained that it was Mother's Day, and she starts feeling guilty because she didn't have a gift for her mom or my mom.
They were there. I didn't even say happy Mother's Day.
I'm sitting there going, lady.
Yeah,
relax."
exactly. Anyway, so a few days later, we came up with the names. We had our rabbi came to the hospital, and she made the point to us that the caregivers needed names. As much as the babies needed them, it was more important for the caregivers to bond with these children.
Sure.
So we decided that we wanted a theme of biblical warriors who overcame long odds. And that's how we came up with Jacob, Benjamin, and Joshua, Caleb.
Oh, that's
Awesome.
amazing.
So Jake and
Beautiful.
Josh, which we later learned many years later that's actually the most common combination of boys, twins names for that era was Jake and
Really?
Josh.
Mm.
So there we were, joining a trend for the most unusual of reasons. So that was very important for the caregivers to start bonding with them as Jake
Sure.
and Josh, not this sterile baby A, baby B. And when their brain bleeds, their brain tests came back and showed minimal to no brain damage, that was a humongous hurdle because now the caregivers kind of started to believe that maybe these kids were going to beat these long odds.
Right.
And there's so many things, that twists and turns along the way. But the first major milestone was not a good one. So they were born on a Saturday. The following Friday, 2 days later, Josh had baby B, who was the one whose womb was intact. He had a hole in his heart that had not. It's a common birth defect, is that a hole in your heart. You're born with a hole in your heart and it doesn't close, but his was causing a problem. So they said. They looked at Jake, and his was starting to close, and they said, we're going to give him medicine to speed it up, but Josh's, the medicine won't work. He needs surgery. So it's an extremely routine procedure, but we've got a baby that's 1 pound, 2 ounces, 17 weeks premature.
Yep.
And so all the normal ways of doing this common procedure were thrown out the window. They had to do it in the NICU, not the operating room, in his incubator. Surgery went well. Went great, no problems. So, that was wonderful. The next day, I'm in the NICU and I'm looking at Jake, and I see his, purple, this discoloration on his legs. And go back a few hours later, and now that purple is up to his torso. And so there's obviously something wrong, and they have to try to figure out what is causing this bleeding.
Sure.
And so the first thought was obviously that it was the hole in the heart. And the same nurse from the NICU from the delivery room with the ponytail swishing back and forth, she's all smiling, and she comes up to me and she makes kind of the okay sign. And I'm thinking, okay, that's it. It's a wide open hole. That's what they're going to do is they're going to go in and they're going to fix that wide open hole, which we've already been through this procedure, and that was easy. So
Yep.
this is great news. I said, so it's the hole in the heart. She says, no, it was okay. There's no problem with the hole in the heart. Isn't that great? And I said, no, this is terrible news, because if it's not that, it's something else. And so it turned out to be something else. It turned out to be a hole in his bowel. And if you recall that I mentioned the medicine he was given to speed up the closing of the hole, well, the side effect of that is a hole in the bowel.
Wow.
And so the doctor, the lead neonatologist, says the common way of doing this procedure is they open them up and they pull out the bowel and the small intestine, which is essentially, says think of it like a garden hose.
Sure.
If you have one hole, you can cut on either side of it and patch it together, and everything's okay. But if you have multiple holes, you pretty much need to get rid of the garden hose.
Like perforated.
Yeah. And so they said, based on the way your baby looks, he has multiple holes, and there's nothing we can do about that.
Mm-hmm.
If he has one, we can fix that. So again, high degree of difficulty, small child, extremely premature, all these other potential issues. And they told us that the procedure would take like 30 minutes if it was there was nothing that could be done to save him. And what was it, an hour and a half or 2 hours?
An hour.
A full hour?
And a half, yes.
No, an hour and a half. It was
Hour
long.
and a half, and a half.
I think it was a little long. There was more of a gap between them. Well, so whatever was the spread, we made it past the bad news time, but it was way too early for the good news time.
But they did tell us beforehand to go to say our goodbyes
Oh.
because they weren't sure about
Thank you.
if he would make it or not.
Yep.
So and we called the rabbi came in, parents, family came in. This was the first time we were actually able to touch him.
First time you get to touch,
To
Either-
touch
either of them.
Either
and,
of them.
and you have a possibility that you may be
Yes.
saying goodbye.
Yes.
Probability. We were told
High-
we're letting
high
you touch.
probabil-
Yeah.
high
We are
Take
probability.
pictures.
bring in all your
do what-
family.
Yeah.
and take as many pictures as you can. And one of the nurses told Jamie to get your wedding ring and put it on the baby and take a picture. So
For a perspective shot.
Yes. So Jamie put it on his arm, and it went all the way up to his shoulder.
Sure.
So you can't fit a nickel through his ring.
We got small hands.
You can fit a dime, but you can't fit a nickel through his ring. So that's how small it.
Oh,
that
and
his
I have
arm
seen that
was.
before. I've seen that
Yeah.
before. It's amazing.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That was one of our more dramatic moments.
Sure.
And so the surgery was, again, it was we made it past the hurdle of the time where they probably would have lost him, but it was way too early for the success. So where the anesthesiologist comes in and just says, "Well, my part's done, but I can't tell you the rest." So our heart's just sinking. What's
Sure.
going on here? And finally, the doctor comes in, and it was a success. And the thing that was so great was he said he went where the money was. So he had this rational approach that the only way to save this child's life was if there was only one hole. If there was only one hole, where was the most likely place for it based on the history and the commonalities and the symptoms, et cetera. And they said that when they cut him open and they suctioned away all the blood and the damage, they were looking right at it. And yes, it's
Which was
a
a
phenomenal story.
blessed moment.
Completely. And so now we've made it through the first week. We've got the good news about the brains. They've each been through a procedure. And so now I'm starting to get emotional earlier in the story than I usually do, but this was sort of where everybody bought in. And I feel like the community caregivers kind of realized that,
This is
these kids,
going to work.
they've got a chance. And now, there's still all those concerns, all the things that they have telethons for, that were in their path, and several hurdles we slammed into, but these guys had a chance. And just to speed things along, I'll tell you that we spend a lot of time in the NICU, and as Natalie probably knows as well, you see a lot of scary things in there, not just your own children. And it's a little bit more private now. Lori volunteers in the NICU, so she sees she can speak more than I can to the difference of what it's like now to what it was in 2002. But the setup there was very public.
It was one big room.
Very
baby next to baby next to baby.
Tough deal.
In
Tough
fact,
deal.
or two, when they were born, there was a crib in between them. They weren't next to each other.
We didn't have the room at the time.
It was still like that in the hospital that we were delivered. Everybody's in the same room, and
Yeah, so you
Yeah,
can't
you
help but
see
see and hear.
everything.
You're basically in a ward. That's
Yes.
the way.
Absolutely.
Yes.
That's the
Yeah.
way.
Yes.
That's the way. It always was. 40 years ago, 50 years ago, everybody was just in a room. You had It's kind of like what you see when you see when you're watching Forrest Gump,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
he's lined
absolutely.
up with all
That
the other.
is completely
That's
what it
exactly right,
was.
Yeah.
And we were, the Natalie mentioned the feeder growers. That was like the good part of the NICU that was close to the front door, and we were in the very back. We were the very last two incubators in the room, so you had to walk by everybody else. And there were lots of sad stories, and the more time you spend there. So as we got back to semi-normal life or new normal under those circumstances, Lori would be there during the day while our oldest was at school and I was at work. And then after he would go to bed, I would be there at night. So I had a good relationship with the night nurses. And somewhere along the way, we cracked the code, so to speak, is that there would be this plastic flower on the front door of the NICU. And when that flower was on the door, it was a silent signal to people that please come in quietly because the baby has died. And the mood in here today is not that good. It was somber. And there was one night where 3 babies died, or a day where 3 babies had died. And, you always, it wasn't really hard to crack the code because you would see that the incubator, a spot would be open, and you knew that baby wasn't ready to go home.
Yeah.
And so I asked one of the more veteran nurses on the night crew, have you ever seen anything like this before? Three babies in one day. And she said, before surfactant, this happened all the time. I didn't know what that meant, but I remembered that phrase. And well, I guess I can jump to it.
Yeah, go.
Lori's giving me the speed up signal.
Well,
so this is
just so you know, we're not in a rush, and this is our time.
Okay.
And this is your time to tell your story. And,
well, she knows I can go on for hours, but
but you can't do that.
So I'll just leave that as a planted seed. So that was something that happened along the way, and because as our babies were going on, I'll transition it this way. So as we too were seeing light at the end of the tunnel, we began to discuss amongst ourselves that there was some organization out there that was kind of like our guardian angels. I wasn't working for the Heart Association at the time, but I remember saying, if you have a heart problem, there's the American Heart Association. If you have cancer, there's Cancer Society. But who was out there looking out for babies? And we didn't know. And so we let it be. And we figured that one day we would find out. So just to wrap up the NICU portion of the story, the boys ended up being there. Baby A, Jake, was there for, I don't remember, 199 or 200 days. And Josh was 8 days more. So Jake came home the Monday before Thanksgiving, and Josh came home the Tuesday after. They each had 2 more surgeries, both related to feeding issues. And Josh came home on oxygen. He had some breathing issues. And we later learned that heart operation that he had on his 3rd day, they nicked a nerve, and so he has a paralyzed vocal cord. Just to give you the perspective, though, that remember I mentioned Mother's Day was the birth, day before Mother's Day, actually. And then they came home right around Thanksgiving. That's a little over 7 months. Mm-hmm. So we were talking before about our shared love of the Houston Astros. So the Astros are about to be at the end of the World Series. Well, think back to spring training, and before the start of the season, that's about how long our boys were in the NICU.
Yeah, a baseball season.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah.
So where do I want to go next with this?
So the way the March of Dimes helped us was the March of Dimes came up with the concept, the NICU concept, the neonatal intensive care unit concept, and they also invented surfactant, which is like an oil that helps the lungs.
Okay, let's back up.
Yeah.
So when did the March of Dimes embrace NICU and preemies? When did that happen? Was there
So somewhere after, I wish I was more versed on this right now, but I know that they transitioned after curing polio into birth defects, and then that led to a focus on infant mortality, which then led to prematurity issues, premature birth, and now the focus is as well on mothers, expectant mothers.
So I'm imagining, because they had to make the transition probably in the 70s and 80s. That was probably the big transitional phase. Now we're in even a different phase.
Yeah,
now
absolutely.
Right. The lungs seem to be the number one thing.
Yeah, well, so I want to unspool it narratively. So the way it came together was a few years later, we'd always been in search of this. Who was this organization that was our guardian angel?
Right.
We want to be involved. And Lori one day was tell the story of that.
I was flipping through a parent's magazine, and I saw it was Walk America, which is now March for Babies.
Yep.
So that's how I found out about to help prematurity.
Yeah, so she
That
said,
was our organization.
look, maybe this is what we've been looking for. Maybe it's the March of Dimes. And, of course, everybody knows the name March of Dimes, but nobody knows what it does because cure polio, it seems like a legacy organization, what it's done. But so we were intrigued, and we had this email distribution list. This was before really people would use Caring Bridge or Facebook or whatever to communicate with people. We just had an email list. And so we tapped into our email list and we said, hey, we are going to do this walk, and it's money to help premature kids. And one thing led to another. We ended up, we got invited to this event for the top 10 fundraising family teams. And they get down to the end of honoring all the people, and we figure, oh, well, I guess maybe it was a mistake that we were invited because they haven't named us yet. And it turned out that we were number one. So then the next day they brought us into the office and said, hey, y'all want to get involved with us? And I said, well, wait a minute. We want to know, what exactly did the March of Dimes do to help our kids? And yes, as Lori said, that's when we learned about the NICU concept. Started with the March of Dimes. Mm-hmm. And most of all, here's the big reveal of the other thing, is the surfactant. So surfactant is a chemical that the body naturally produces that keeps your lungs, it's like I think she said, the grease, it's like an oil that keeps your lungs from sticking every time they close. Yeah. And if you're born premature, your body hasn't created that yet. They don't
have the ability to inflate and
so what happens is when it deflates, it sticks. Yeah. And so the steroids shot that our first son got, our oldest got, it sped up the development of his lungs, and so his body created surfactant. Mm-hmm. Our kids didn't make it long enough. I believe it's 27, 28 weeks. It's later in the gestational cycle than our guys made it.
Right.
But they got artificial surfactant, which was developed by research funded by the March of Dimes.
Sweet.
And so as soon as I heard that in the March of Dimes offices, I immediately recalled my conversation with the veteran nurse who said before surfactant, it happened all the time.
Yeah.
And so it was like, okay, that's it. We're bought in. Yeah. We're done.
Makes total sense.
So the line that I often say is, we owe the March of Dimes a debt of gratitude that we can never repay, but we're going to keep trying.
That's great. That's great. So tell me about kids now. Tell us where we are.
You brag. I'll shut up for a while.
You're headed down that road.
They're 17 years old. They just took the ACT this past weekend, so they're doing good.
Good.
They're
they play basketball and baseball for their high school team.
Sweet. Where do they play? Where do they go?
Left out. Oh,
Lake Hill.
Lake Hill. Good. So they are athletic. They're doing great.
Other than like I mentioned, the paralyzed vocal cord.
Yeah.
So his voice is a little lower and kind of gravelly.
Kind of like mine right now.
You wouldn't notice especially. Well, they have the railroad track scars on their bellies and stuff. But other than that, you wouldn't know a thing.
Sure. Well, I've seen enough films, and I've been involved with the organization. I've heard a lot. And of course, I've given testimony about March of Dimes at the fundraising events. We always have presentations, and so you guys are extremely blessed. And thank you for that story. That's awesome. That's because what this show is about is unveiling things that people don't know about. Okay, this show will be around presumably forever, as long as there is a forever here on Earth. Because between YouTube and Facebook and all these places, this will be out there. And there'll be people educated about it. There'll be people that learn about March of Dimes that never knew anything about it or are being directly impacted and will end up needing the March of Dimes.
We hope so. We have a website, jakeandjosh.net. Mm-hmm. And every so often we still connect. People still find it and feel inspired by reading our story and learning our success, and we just keep putting it out there because we just want to pay it forward. We want, if we can provide hope, and we have to be careful. We've been, there is a chance for false hope.
Sure.
We realize that we beat extremely long odds. It's not supposed to be this way.
Yeah.
Neither boy should have survived, and if they did, they both should have had a lot wrong with them.
Right.
So that is part of this debt of gratitude that we just owe to the cosmos. That we just, by sharing our story, we want to provide hope, but we temper it with the fact that we are fortunate and we recognize it.
Yeah, you're blessed.
And there's things from their story that we share that you can't even really put that into words for people. Like you guys had kiddos in the NICU for 7 months, but you were also still raising your older son. And our twins were in there for 3 months, and we were still raising 2 little boys. And my oldest, from just having his brothers in the NICU, was treated for PTSD for about a year. We had to take him to the NICU because he was so confused at 4, and he's out of the 4, he's our big, deep thinker. And so he's filling in the blanks very incorrectly. And we took him into the NICU, and he saw Isaac for the first time because Sammy was so scary to look at, quite frankly. We just couldn't do that to him. But Isaac, they were 3 days old, and he looked at Isaac, and he goes, I could snap his finger. And I said, you could. Do you want to? He said, no, but you're not supposed to be able to break a bone with your hands. And so
A lot of analysis there.
yeah, it's just, there's just some intangibles that we can't communicate at all about what that time was like, and sharing moments that you really shouldn't be sharing with strangers, like the last bath and the goodbyes, I don't know if you guys experienced this, but there was a couple of moments in the NICU where we had been in longer than another baby, and that baby was going home. And while, it wasn't like I was wishing any
No, it's
pain on
conflicted
somebody
feelings.
else.
Absolutely.
But
we
I was
talked
just
about that a lot.
devastated that we have flown past our due date now, and we're still here. It's
yes.
just,
Is there a sense of guilt?
Well, hugely,
Huge.
because you're seeing somebody else's happiness and you're feeling jealous or bitter.
Yeah.
And even if it's family you may have bonded with and you're so happy for them, but you can't help but feel guilty. And then the other thing that I know Natalie can understand that others can't is that every day is difficult because you have one baby that's doing better than the other.
yeah, it's a gut punch. One day everything could be going great, and you leave the hospital, and you get a call before Dad can get up to the NICU, and something has gone wrong.
Roller coaster.
Yeah, it's a gut punch. You're
Yeah, what
just waiting
about-
for the gut punch.
What about the possibility of guilt because of the opposite situation where your kids are doing well and you're seeing others lose their children right in
Oh,
front
yeah.
of you,
Yes,
right in front of you? So I would think it would be a double-edged emotional roller coaster all the time.
So there's actually 2 stories I'd like to tell about that. About halfway through our stay, we had our oldest up in the NICU with us one day, and there was a carnival going on at the hospital.
It was the NICU reunion.
Yes, we didn't know what it was exactly. They just said there's this event, there's clowns and balloons and popcorn. Take your oldest down there. And so Lori stayed in the NICU with the babies, and as we were leaving, there was this family that they were bringing out like a privacy screen for this family to be there with this baby. And Zach and I went downstairs. We go to the carnival. He gets his face painted, whatever. We have fun. We come back up, and that spot where the family and the baby was with the privacy screen is now vacant.
Yeah.
And the juxtaposition, obviously that baby died while we were downstairs at the party. And that juxtaposition of here we are celebrating the success stories. It was a NICU reunion. These are the families who made it out of the NICU are coming back to see their friends and celebrate life. And while we were gone, another NICU baby died.
Sure.
That juxtaposition is just so jarring. And the other one along those lines is that I mentioned about we had one come home right before Thanksgiving and the other right after. Well, Thanksgiving night, I was still a sports writer then. I covered the Cowboys game. And after the game, instead of going home, our family had everybody was back in bed. So I went to the NICU. And it was around midnight of the Thursday into Friday, and the place was empty. Even the crew was minimal. And except they had a emergency operation for a baby in the NICU like we had with our baby, one of our babies early on. And so they cleared the place, but they let me stay because I had been there 7 months.
You were kind of a fixture.
Yeah.
Your family.
And I was the only parent there, and they were like, yeah, whatever, just sit there, hold your baby. And that baby died in surgery. And I will never forget the screams of that mother when I saw the whole family come in before to say goodbye, wish the doctor and the baby good luck. The family left. The family came back in, and the mother ran out screaming.
Yeah.
And, you just like, the line I always say is that you spend 7 months in a NICU and you see things you could never want to see anywhere else.
And you'll never forget.
You won't. And, it reminds me of something you mentioned at the very beginning of the show about the tornadoes and the devastation that we saw here. You have to see it to truly understand it. And, I mean, I'm sure people everywhere have been seeing a tornado, hopefully not, but some sort of natural devastation. And it takes seeing as believing, and I think all of us can attest to the same as to what it's like being in a NICU.
Well, I'm extremely happy for you, and I like to hear success stories. We hear a lot of bad stuff, but it's always good to be reminded of the good stuff. And so, Natalie, I know that you have your own situation. Your children are younger. And you've still got a long time to deal with all this stuff. Their kids are getting grown, and that's awesome. And thank God for the March of Dimes, right?
Yes.
Without a doubt.
So before we wrap it up, I want to talk about an evening that's coming up, and it's going to be on Thursday, November the 7th, and it's at 6500. That's the name of the place here in Dallas on Cedar Springs. In fact, I was there Thursday night doing an event for another group, so I know this very well. So if you're at Love Field and you're driving out of Love Field, you literally just drive across the street and there's a service station on the corner, and we're right behind there. And it's right next to the Tesla dealership.
Nice.
And very nice. And so the name of this is, and I'm going to read the heading. It's on the website. You can go to Signature Chefs. .marchofdimes.org if people would like to check it out. We'd love for them to check it out. I'll be there. I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to be working with Mike Ducey from Channel 4. He and I have been friends for a long time. We worked a lot of different events together. He's our MC for the event, and it's the evening of culinary experience. Signature Chefs here in Dallas. As I mentioned before, I've done it many times in the past. You can purchase tickets online. In fact, that's all available to you. But we would just want to tell you that 20 of Dallas's top chefs are going to be involved. This is an event that they've got it down. Okay, there'll be food stations. There'll be a lot of people there. 500 business leaders are involved in this. Community leaders, philanthropists, healthcare providers, the top health people when it relates to preemies and the NICU. We've been doing this for over 24 years. I go back about that time in the very beginning. We weren't raising the big dollars that are available today, but they have raised over $12 million in the last 24 years. We have a great group of Dallas leaders that are involved as the co-chairs and the committee. Kent Rathbun, I just worked with him on American Cancer Society with our top chefs in Dallas. We sell a package there, and Ken is our lead chef for this event. So he's our star chef who always helps get the guys together.
I believe he started the event.
Oh yeah, he's been on the front end ever since I've been involved. And but you also want to tell people, people can become a sponsor of this event. If not this year, next year. We would encourage anyone within the shout of my voice, which is basically, I've got people right now that are going to be watching this in South Africa and Germany and different Ireland. We have people watch this show all over the place, which is crazy. But we're very excited to support March of Dimes. When I mentioned this to Ann and the folks in the office, because Ann and I had worked together on some other fundraising events, we will always be available to promote and get people to show up. And I know that you want people to show up, bring their dollars. We've got some great auction packages. We don't have a whole lot. We're very selective about the packages we're going to do, but the chefs are very supportive and they're very involved in this, and we appreciate their support as well. Natalie, do you have anything else you'd like to close with as we wrap this show up?
No, thank you so much for having us on and allowing each of us to tell our stories. I think it's great, and it affects 1 in 10 babies is born premature. So it's not an uncommon occurrence. We just don't talk about it very often.
It doesn't make the news.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. It just doesn't make the news. It's not sexy.
Yeah, there's a T-shirt that we saw at the March Dimes event that Lori and I were once at that's stuck with me, and I mention it every time I can. So it says, have a baby, want a baby, were a baby, then the March of Dimes has affected you.
That's right.
Because even if you don't end up in a NICU, even if you don't have a premature baby, that's because of the work that the March of Dimes has done to prevent that, to help for every happy, successful, quote-unquote, normal pregnancy. The March of Dimes has helped.
Well, it worked for polio.
Yeah.
You know,
Pretty good proof of concept.
It's a good testimony right there, and they will continue to have new technology. That's the thing.
Yes.
We keep improving everything. It just takes time. The ones we're working on now are more challenging, more difficult, and that's why it takes as long as it does. It's not a silver bullet, and so all we can do is trust the doctors to continue to come up with new programs and institute them, and let hopefully the United States government will approve these things quicker so that we can implement them faster, and it doesn't take all the bureaucracy to make something happen.
It's all about funding research.
And on a final note, since you were
Actually, do you mind if I jump in with a couple other thoughts?
No.
So the Signature Chefs event,
Yeah.
last year we were the ambassador family, and so we got to get up there and tell our stories and show off our little footprint business cards, and then we got to introduce the boys. They were there, of course, and they got a standing ovation from the crowd.
That's awesome.
And that was a very significant, emotional, cool deal for us.
that was a life moment.
It really was.
Yeah.
It was because for so long we've talked about them, but to get to show them off in that context, and it was kind of look, this is what your dollars go to. You can have happy endings like this. And if you go to the event this year, they're going to be among, I don't remember what they're going to be volunteering. Four of us will be there. What are they? I don't know. Greeters at the door or something. So hopefully, if you're watching this, if you're listening, and you come to the event, look for us. You know what Lori and I now look like, and we'd be honored to introduce you to Jake and Josh.
That's awesome.
And then there's another event also worth promoting that's coming up called Breakfast with a Champion.
Okay.
And this is the 25th annual event of that. Tim Brown, the former Notre Dame football star,
friend of
will be
mine.
at that.
Yep.
And he's the guest of honor, and he's also been affected by the mission. He had a premature child as well. So more details about that are available on the website.
Yeah.
It's a great event.
Tim Brown, Heisman winner and National Football League Hall of Fame member, and also a proud graduate of Woodrow Wilson High School here in Dallas. So he's kind of our local guy that he's done it all, been there, and super supportive. He has a great base. He's very well rounded as a human being, and he shows up at the right places and supports a lot of great groups. So we appreciate Tim Brown. It's a shout out to Tim Brown for the things that he does here in Dallas, and not just here in Dallas, because he travels, But on another note, since you're a proud Houstonian, and the Astros, of course, what's our record now? Is on the World Series right now? What are we, 3-2?
3-2.
So we took the lead last night, and that was pretty awesome. And so I guess are they coming back to Houston now?
Yeah, we're going to close it out tomorrow night.
That's right.
Okay, he's very, very confident. Well, as a guy that grew up in Houston a long time ago, and going to some really bad Astro games, I can tell you, Leo DeRocher, who is historic as a baseball player, was our manager in like 1971, 72, 3 right in there. And I just remember we were just the worst baseball team in the world. But the beautiful thing is, the Astrodome was only about 7 years old, maybe 8 years old. So, you didn't have to have a great baseball team. We had the dome.
Eighth wonder of the world.
Eighth wonder of the world, and that was awesome. And the only other thing about the Astros I remember growing up as a kid, so you had Hank Aaron getting ready to break Babe Ruth's all-time record of 714 home runs. And so I was all excited. I get tickets to the game. Atlanta is in Houston. And he's one away from breaking the record. And there's poster night, Hank Aaron poster night. They hyped that dude, and then they sat him on the bench.
So he'd get it at home.
So when he went, they closed that series out, went right back to Atlanta, and Al Downing threw the pitch, broke the record. I'll never forget it. I've been heartbroken ever since. Well, guys, on behalf of the show here, I appreciate you being here, and thank you very much for March of Dimes and everything that they're doing.
We're honored, and we appreciate everything you do for the organization.
Well, you bet. Well,
Thank you.
God bless all three of you. So on behalf of everyone here in Dallas, at North Dallas, here at LBJ and the North Dallas Tollway, my producer Trelvis, and everybody that's a part of this one, and the Mike McGavel Jones Show, we'll see you next time when we do it all over again. And from Dallas, we bid you adieu.